There is no doubt that one of the most important events in history was the Russian Revolution, as it marked the beginning of a project that had been conceived decades earlier, the Communist Project. The first ones to try it, the Bolsheviks after the fall of the Romanovs, giving rise to the most recent extinct superpower of all, the Soviet Union. Are you interested in knowing the history, the significance and consequences of this colossal state and its controversial ideology? Alright, then stay until the end of the video. Today, we have the collaboration of my friend Raphael from the channel The Chest of Useless Knowledge. Subscribe to his channel to see amazing content about history, politics, and alternate realities. I'll leave the link in the description. We go back to the year 1917. The Russian Empire, under Nicholas II from the House of Romanov's command, was at that time receiving a crushing defeat on the Eastern Front during World War I. It's important to note that Nicholas was leading the largest state of the time, which spanned from Eastern Europe to Siberia, reaching the Pacific Ocean. Despite its colossal territory, Russia had fallen behind compared to the European powers. Not only was its population suffering from hunger and dragged into a bloody war, but it also did not have the military might to face the Central Powers. As you can imagine, a starving people forced to give their lives in a complicated war is an angry people. And this goes hand in hand with the rise of a controversial ideology that was becoming fashionable on the continent. Socialism, and like all ideologies, would be embraced by certain political parties. In the case of Russia, the Social Democratic Labour Party, later known as the Bolshevik Party, whose leader was the remembered Vladimir Lenin. It's important to highlight that these revolutionary feelings were growing despite the fact that the regime of Nicholas II had given in by establishing the first Russian constitution and an assembly known as the Imperial Duma after the 1905 revolution. Yes, none of this was enough. Returning to 1917, and with all the above, the February Revolution breaks out in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, in which they managed to overthrow Tsar Nicholas, and power is divided. On one hand, a provisional government that wanted to establish a liberal democracy and was made up of liberal and moderate socialist politicians who intended to return to war with their former allies. On the other hand, the Soviets, which were councils representing the working class with a radical socialist ideology scattered throughout the country. The most important of them, the Petrograd Soviet, whose most remembered leader was Leon Trotsky. These Soviets were mostly led by members of the Bolshevik Party. Yes, an ideology that prided itself on looking after the interests of the vast majority of workers was gaining more power. As new power centers grow distant, the revolution flares up again within a quarter of the year, marking a confrontation between the factions. The Petrograd Soviet, led by the Bolshevik Party, manages to overthrow the provisional government. The dissidents of the Bolshevik Revolution group together in the White Army, confronting the Red Army. The Russian Civil War had begun. It's important to highlight that the Russian Empire was divided into 36 states, according to the various ethnicities of the empire as such. These states were the predecessors of the socialist republics that have given rise to the current countries, as well as the other 22 republics that still remain as general subjects of the current Russia. In the end, this bloody war that extended to all the territories of the former Russian Empire claimed a toll of between 3 and 5 million dead. Both sides had temporary allies, the Red Army, the Soviets from each of the republics, after the dissolved Russian Empire, and that were forming some Soviet republics, while the Whites had the support of the Allied intervention and separatist governments. Speaking of separatism, some countries tried to wage their own wars of independence, among which Republic of Poland stands out, who managed to overthrow the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic and declare the Second Republic of Poland. Other countries that achieved their independence are Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. The Bolsheviks, for their part, achieved victory in Russia, Ukraine Republic of Belarus, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. In 1922, 4 of the Soviet republics, Russia, Transcaucasia, Ukraine and Republic of Belarus signed the Treaty of the Creation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, formed by the Supreme Congress of the Soviets. The Soviet Union was born. The war would extend until 1923 with the final defeat of the White Army. The Soviet Union consolidates and annexes all the territories that did not achieve their independence. That is, everything except the most Western countries. Lenin, the main figure of the revolution, would die in 1924 after trying to restructure the industry and economy. His legacy would transcend through various schools of thought, and with the start of the communist project in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Since 1922, another key man had come onto the scene, the Georgian Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili, better known as Stalin. This memorable character had climbed in politics to get the position of the secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union's successor of the Bolshevik Party. Indeed, Stalin had such political skill that he gradually made his own position gain more power since Lenin's death, which included the repression of his opponents within the Communist Party, such as Trotsky, whom he sent into exile until he assassinated him in Mexico in 1940. And the repression within the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was not limited to political rivals, but also to all citizens opposing the socialist regime, through the creation of the famous Gulag, which spread throughout the country. These forced labor camps are remembered for the horrors experienced by the prisoners, who suffered serious human rights violations. The number of deaths between 1930 and 1956 is estimated at over 1.5 million. As for economic reforms, they were based on 5-year plans based on the theory of productive forces and helped the development of the industry, achieving the industrialization of the country, leading it to become a military power. These plans were based on socialist ideas, such as strong state intervention in the economy and the limitation of private property in favor of the state owning the means of production. In terms of international politics, an anti-capitalist sentiment was formed, although the main rival ideology was the rising Nazism, which is reflected in the Soviet support during the Spanish Civil War for the Republican side. Despite the above, the Soviet Union signs a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany, the Ribbentrop-Molotov. Yes, we arrive on the eve of World War II at a time when the sides were already armed and tensions on the old continent were at their peak. The Soviet interests, the expansion through their lost territories, the agreement with Germany to divide Republic of Poland, while Estonia, Latvia, and Finland would fall under Soviet influence. And so it was, with the invasion of Republic of Poland from both fronts, the Second World War began. After this successful occupation, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics tried to occupy Finland after the Manila Incident, starting the Winter War. Although with this war the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics managed to snatch some Finnish territory, its reputation was diminished, as a country as small as Finland was able to repel their attacks and wage war on them. This would give confidence to Hitler, who had achieved constant victories on the Western Front, to break the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact and invade Stalin's Soviet Union, his communist rival, with Operation Barbarossa initiated in June 1941. The Eastern Front of World War II had been activated. This front stands out for being one of the deadliest episodes of the war, with 8.5 million deaths on the Soviet side and almost 3 million on the German side. Also noteworthy is the Battle of Volgograd, considered the bloodiest battle in the history of mankind, with over 2 million deaths, in addition to marking the turning point for Nazi Germany, as it began its retreat here after having occupied much of the Soviet territory. But the final blow to Nazi Germany would come with the Battle of Berlin, in which the Soviets invaded the German capital in May 1945, sealing the end of World War II in Europe, the recovery of the Baltic countries, Hitler's suicide, the fall of the Third Reich, and the division of German territory into Western and Soviet spheres of influence. With the end of World War II, and as established by Stalin with the leaders of the Allied countries at the Yalta Conference, Europe would be divided by the remembered Iron Curtain, within which the Eastern countries fell under Soviet influence. This marks the beginning of the Cold War with the rise of two superpowers with opposing ideologies, capitalist United States and socialist Soviet Union. The early years of the Cold War were characterized by Soviet aid to Eastern Bloc countries for reconstruction, while turning them into satellite states. This fact was embodied with the foundation of the Warsaw Pact, a military alliance that would be the counterpart to North Atlantic Treaty Organization led by the United States. Economically, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics founded the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, into which it incorporated various countries as they went along, adopting the communist ideology. This bloc would aid the rise of a great ally, Mao Zedong's Chinese Communist Party with the Asian giant. Stalin would die in 1953, marking the beginning of Nikita Khrushchev's rule, one of the most remembered leaders of the Cold War. The new ruler would have to face the diplomatic break with Communist China due to conflicts of interest and interpretation of Marxism. This meant rivalry between the two nations for world supremacy of communism. Khrushchev also confronted numerous proxy wars, a crucial part of the Cold War involving indirect conflicts with the US in overseas territories to extend his influence. One of the most representative of this case was the Vietnam War, which meant one of the worst setbacks for the United States and the expansion of communism in the region. Probably the closest moment to the outbreak of a war between both superpowers was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which occurred after the United States discovered nuclear missiles in Cuban territory. Fortunately, this crisis was resolved diplomatically, and both countries agreed to withdraw missiles from their allied countries, in addition to the creation of the Red Phone for direct communication between Washington and Moscow. The ideological, political, military, economic, and even sports race is added to the space race. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics takes the lead by sending the first human being into outer space, Yuri Gagarin. Despite these advances, Khrushchev's reforms in agriculture and administration were unproductive, which led to his forced resignation in 1964. The next figure to take command of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics would be Leonid Brezhnev, with whom a period known as the Brezhnev stagnation began, during which there was a notable socio-economic slowdown in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which was being left behind by the prosperity of capitalist countries and the continuous growth of American influence. Although the level of repression and censorship in general had decreased since Stalin's death, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics continued to seek to maintain its influence by force, as during the invasion of Czechoslovakia, which sought liberal reforms during the Prague Spring. Faced with such a slowdown, Brezhnev initiated a period of détente with the West, that is, a reduction of tensions with the United States through diplomatic agreements. He'll also be recalled for endorsing the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics' final and fourth constitution. Upon Brezhnev's death, in 1982, the stagnation continued under the successive governments of Yuri Andropov and Konstantin Shevchenko. As we approach the twilight of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, a new leader comes to power, Mikhail Gorbachev. We are in the 80s, when the collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics' economic and political structures was becoming increasingly evident. For this reason, Gorbachev implemented two memorable reforms in the political and economic fields. With perestroika, the Soviet economy underwent a reform that encouraged the liberalization of prices. Yes, escaping somewhat from the socialist essence. With glasnost, the aim was to liberalize the political system, as well as improve freedom of expression. With all this, Stalinism began to be strongly questioned throughout the country, as the difference in development between the countries of the East and West of the Iron Curtain was extremely noticeable. To the misfortunes of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, both internal and external events are added that continue to sink it. Internal ones like the Chernobyl incident, considered the worst nuclear accident in history, which caused a large part of the Soviet economy to go away. encountering the catastrophic effects of this disaster. External ones like the fall of the Berlin Wall, which signified the German reunification and the disappearance of the Iron Curtain. The Cold War was ending with the capitalist bloc led by the United States of America as the clear victor. In the face of political instability, some republics begin to organize referendums for their independence. According to Article 72 of the Soviet Constitution, the first to want to leave are the Baltic republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. In response, Gorbachev calls a referendum for the preservation of the Soviet Union, which resulted in a majority opting for its preservation over all the Central Asian republics. However, in the face of a secret treaty in which they would replace the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics with a union of sovereign states, a coup attempt arises in 1991. This coup, organized by the hardliners of the Communist Party, occurs while Gorbachev was on vacation. Despite having deposed him for a short time, the then president of Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, Boris Yeltsin, manages to calm the population's spirits with his memorable speech, with which he manages to thwart the coup. And of course, in the process, he demotes Gorbachev's image as a leader. Many believe that this event was the final unlocking of the Soviet Union, as without any faction to safeguard its integrity, the various republics continue to declare their independence. For his part, in December 1991, the presidents of the republics of Russia, that is Yeltsin, Ukraine and Republic of Belarus, signed the Belavesia Accords, which officially dissolved the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in favor of the Community of Independent States, which some of the already independent former Soviet republics joined. With this, Gorbachev presents his resignation, while Yeltsin remains as president of the successor Russia. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet flag is lowered from the Kremlin, with the Russian imperial flag being raised the next day. And with this, the last trace of that superpower pioneer in implementing the communist project disappears. And what do you think? Do you think that in some way the memorable Soviet Union has left any positive legacy for humanity?